We're about to hear Steve Greenfield's origin story.
This is Auto Collabs.
That story is the one, no spoilers, Kyle, but I can't believe I've never asked before, like, hey, tell us about how you got into auto. I think the Auto Nation side of it, we just like accepted that as like what it should be. But Steve is by far, in my opinion, one of the most interesting men in automotive, and one of the most thoughtful men in automotive.
You know, speaking of origin stories, I feel like every podcast I go on, including Michael Cirillo's, has some level of like, tell us your origin story. How did you get into auto? Which I feel like at this point, someone should have asked Steve Greenfield. But I've listened to a lot of podcasts and seen Steve Greenfield on a lot of things, and I've never heard that. And so, yeah, it's super interesting story. But one of the things that I think is really cool about Steve Greenfield is the way that he like service from in his mindset of the industry is like a through line of everything that he does. His goal is to literally serve at all costs. It doesn't matter if it's a VC fund. It doesn't matter if it's a monthly email or a LinkedIn profile or a clubhouse room. It doesn't matter. There is like this deep core in him that just says, hey, I'm here for you. And
Is that because he's Canadian?
Infectious. Probably. He's got
Is
a
that-
queen.
It's something about
'cause he has a
Canadians,
queen.
man. We don't open our mouths until we know what we're talking about. I'm just
Is that how
saying.
is that how it goes?
It's true though. I'm excited to learn more about this because, you know, especially when you read his posts on LinkedIn or you see any of his output, it's clear that he isn't just speaking from the hip. He has clearly formulated a thought process, looking so deeply into the future and learning so deeply from the past that what he spits out, you're like, oh man, I never thought of it to that degree, which is a breath of fresh air in the industry today where everyone just kind of chirps, right? So I'm excited to learn about how he became who he is today and how he got into it all.
Well,
Well,
that's
tell me
perfect
some.
because we should just check out the
Okay,
interview.
okay,
We'll catch you on the backside of it for sure.
Steve, thank you so much for giving us some time. It's good to see you, just full of energy.
Good to see you guys too. Thanks for having me.
So I think over the last, 12 to 24 months, probably most poignantly in the last 12 months, it seems that your audience has grown quite a bit. This is what I observe on social media, and just the conversation I have and the people that want you to come in and give your feedback. You have the investment arm going. And I think it's important for people to understand where you came from, because I think it's easy when someone's there, people just accept, oh, it's Steve Greenfield. He does these things now. But the reason you can do these things now is because you did these things before you did the things that you do now. So this is a question we've been asking some people. How did you get into the auto industry, period? Like, what was your first step into the auto world?
Well, no surprise, probably like a lot of people, it wasn't exactly intentional, right? So I found myself, with a general arts undergrad degree and largely unemployable, and like a lot of us.
Yeah.
And my buddy, one of my best friends from high school, was the systems administrator, the computer guy at an auto auction on the outskirts of Toronto, where I grew up. So I get a call one night, and he says, "Steve, they're looking to hire a technology manager." I'm like, "What is that?" I'm like, "Oh, you're going to be selling software to car dealers." I'm like, "Why am I qualified for that?" He says, "No, I really think this could be a good role for you. You should come in." So I went in and, didn't know what to expect. And, I remember distinctively driving out there. I was like, how do used cars get on dealers' lots? That's what consumed me for the 45 minutes on the way out there. And I was like, I would have bet anything at that point. 100% of cars came onto dealers' lots as trade-ins. I knew nothing about the wholesale mechanisms and wholesale auction industry. So I get out there. It's like the biggest auction in Canada. It's like top 5 in Mannheim's footprint. So it's like 400 acres of
That's
of
a
pavement.
real operation.
It's a real operation, 400 acres. And I'm like, wow, look at this place. Where are these cars coming from? Why are they here? And I walk in and, negotiate with the general manager, who also was the previous owner before Mannheim bought him. And it was funny. It's like, starting salary, 25,000. But he was also going to give me the first month's revenue. And this is before there was like MRR, like monthly recurring revenue. So he said, you're gonna try to sell dealers access to Manheim.com for $50 a month, and we'll pay you the first month. And I was like,
Just all of it.
all right. I mean, I'll probably end up making 25 grand a year, but that's fine. So the funny thing is, two things happened, right? Well, a bunch of things happened, but two things specifically. One, about 3 months in, I get a call from the general manager of Manheim Online. I'm like, uh-oh, why is this guy calling me?
Yeah.
So he says, what are you doing up there? I was like, what do you mean? He says, well, you're selling more than any of our other 89 auction locations. Wow. And he says, you just started like 3 months ago. How are you doing that? And I said, well, if you got a few minutes, let me tell you what I'm doing. And then, at the end of the call, he said, would you ever consider moving down to the US?
He's poaching him
We
right
got
now.
this stuff over here that
Yeah.
we're trying to do.
Well, the other thing you guys will love is like, I around that time, I get a call into the general manager's office, right? Great guy, love him, right? Still love him to this day. He was a great mentor to me. But, he says to me, he says, Steve, about your pay package. I said, yeah. He said, well, it's not going to work anymore.
Of course.
And I was like, well, what do you mean? He says, well, you're tracking to make more money than anyone here than me this year. And like, it's an auction with like 400 employees or 450 employees or something. Right? And, I didn't have the balls nor the season to say, explain to me how this is a bad thing for you.
Yeah, right.
Like, the fact that I'm selling
Right.
so much.
Doesn't this
Right.
work out?
Is this a bad thing?
Sorry, I
Doesn't this
messed
work
it up
out?
so
Right?
much.
And even worse, like now, the economics, like if you have a recurring revenue product and you only sell the salesperson only gets comped for the first month.
The first
it's a
month.
win.
You didn't even get
Hello?
retention bonuses. Or
So
per
anyway,
month.
but I'm sure, I don't know if he ever, but hopefully he listens to this podcast.
I hope he
and,
does
like,
listen to
and
this.
and laughs about it because he's like, yeah, he'll recall having that conversation with me. And I'm sure it was super uncomfortable for him. But in any case, he was the one ultimately that encouraged me to take the leap, get down to the US. And the rest is kind of history. I mean, I've had great roles that have been kind of instrumental in getting me to where I am now, but that was the first step.
Give us first of all, this is an amazing story.
That's amazing.
But what did you do in those 90 days, in 3 months?
Well, okay, as much as you want, you may just edit this part out, but it isn't that exciting. But the interesting thing, and I struck upon an opportunity that's rare in life, right? So I get into this role, and at that point, Odessa locations in Canada, there were like 14 of them, and there were only 2 Manheim locations. But because Manheim was so much bigger in the US, they had built the online platform that Odessa was using, the competitor. So I realized that there were 14 locations across Canada, Odessa's our competitor, who had similar people, similar roles, technology managers, who were out trying to convince dealers to use Odessa.com, Odessa.ca up there to buy cars, but it was powered by us. And the only way those dealers could get access to buy cars at Odessa sites was to subscribe to Manheim.com. So all I did was make 14 phone calls. I said, let me make it really easy for you. I'm gonna send you a 1-page document, which
He just put together. He went
a plan.
pyramid.
It was a process. It was exactly right. And like, dude, it was amazing. This is the most amazing thing. So I send them all a 1-page form to fill out and said, look, I promise you this, right? Within 24 hours of you sending me this over, I'll get your dealer hooked up. And then if they ever need tech support for the life of the customer, just have them call me. Here's my cell phone number. And the women in the front office hated me because the fax machine was running nonstop. Fax machines, not emails, fax machines. And these poor women would bring me stacks of paper. And all I would do, I got to admit, I never visited one dealer. Ever. Wow. I never visited one dealer. I sat there and I just took orders. And I used to have to go in Saturday and Sunday. And I used to go in early and stay. I was always the first employee in, the last employee to leave. I came in Saturday, Sunday. But I mean, I was limited by how many orders I could push through. And these poor folks down in Atlanta that were taking these orders and like, what is wrong with you? Like, what are you doing up there? So I was just like
leveraging the network.
It was a system that I was able to put into place.
Okay, look,
Paul.
Yeah. We did a podcast earlier today, and we were like, "What's the through line?" Right?
Right.
I'm like, right. Here's the through line. Steve Greenfield came into the automotive industry leveraging the network, and he's still doing that today. It's unbelievable. That's
Well, guys,
so
I mean,
good.
I can tell you this, like, I mean, there are things to be learned in life. And, I have a book that I'm writing, which tentatively is titled Building Demand Systems. But, I've seen folks in our industry, most notably like Dale Pollock, building a philosophy before a software product.
Yes.
And I remember I oversaw the acquisition of vAuto, and I used to travel a lot with Dale, and I used to always laugh at him because Dale would stand up in front of an audience of dealers in the early days and tell them they weren't worthy, and tell them, if they didn't believe in the philosophy, they didn't buy in the philosophy, he wasn't going to sell them the software. And it was like the
took it
ultimate
away before they
takeaway sale.
asked.
It was a takeaway sale. And you look at what folks like Grant Cardone have done in this industry as well. Like, we got a lot of cases where people have, like, very, very thoughtfully, I'm like an understudy here. I mean, these guys are pros, but I mean, there have been models that have been built in this industry around building demand systems. And I think someone needs to write about these things, because there's evidence of these things, and all of us can learn. All of us can learn from them.
Gee whiz. Well, see, that's why we don't cut things out of these podcasts, because I think the texture that anyone who has known you for a while, I've known you for a while, we've had a lot of conversations, and that just gives a whole new texture. I feel like the black and white just turned color for me, and I understand so much more about why you are so successful at what you are doing now. So, I mean, I don't even know where to go.
I don't even know where to go from here. I'm like,
in my
hit
mind.
record and
Well, let's go here. So, obviously that was when you stepped into automotive, largely unemployable, to use your own words, right? And you saw the power of the network, and you just started, doing things, obviously working really hard, bell to bell on the vendor side, right? Getting there first, entering things in, leaving last. And now your career seems to have taken a significant turn, or at least it looks a lot different from an outsider's perspective, because you are resourcing the industry constantly with your insights and this kind of aggregation of what's going on in the tech markets and with acquisitions, because that is also a part of your pedigree at this point. And now you're starting to search out, with a group of dealer investors, search out solutions so you can fund them and kind of move the industry forward the next step. What is the common thread from your perspective that runs through all of those things? Because there's several things going on there. What do you see as the common thread that kind of gets you up in the morning and says, I need to do these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of us, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way, but I feel really lucky to have stumbled across this industry, right? I mean, at this point, I don't know that I'm employable outside of the industry.
Anywhere else,
right? Exactly. So I'm it's stuck with me. I'm stuck with it. But I do feel really lucky. I had a great 10 years at Manheim where I learned a ton. I had a great 5 years at Auto Trader where I learned a ton. Had a short stint out at TrueCar where I learned a ton. In amongst that time was an entrepreneur who raised money myself and burned through all that money. And so I have a tremendous amount of empathy for entrepreneurs.
What did you raise the money for?
So Automotive Ventures, originally when I left Auto Trader back in 2014, we were going to build a suite of like consumer and dealer facing products based on data. So in fact, It's funny, the original idea was called Carlingo. And the idea was to have an online marketplace that allowed you to configure an entire car deal. And this is before Roadster, right? This is like the early days where we're like, okay, so what does a marketplace need to evolve into? Well, at some point, a consumer is going to be able to go into a marketplace and negotiate their trade, get financing approval, get a monthly payment, and ultimately, choose the dealer. And it's more than just leads. It's going to be actually like transactable deals that are going to be portable. And the idea was maybe too early, or maybe just like a failure of execution or combination thereof. But I'll chalk it up. I'll take the burden of like the failure, but
I don't know. My first thought was just like, oh, that's early looking wrong.
Yep.
Right?
That's
Could
exactly
be.
But I appreciate your humility.
Yeah. But yeah, to get back to your question, I think that I find myself now having had enough experience in the space to have a perspective, and data is kind of worthless without distilling it down into insights. Insights are interesting, but really it's taking the next step and saying, okay, make it actionable, right? Like give me something that's tangible that I can go follow a roadmap, build a roadmap around. And that's what I struggle with every day. That's what gets me up in the morning, right? It's like, I feel the burden of saying, I'm a student of the industry, but what I'm trying to do is translate all of this disparate information into something tangible, a framework where whether it's a dealer or an OEM or other industry participants can look at it and say, okay, let me make sense of this. Let me make sense of either the transactions that are taking place, what valuations are being paid, who's buying what, what are the kind of like the trends in the industry? What are the probabilities that those trends are going to hit? What's the magnitude of the impact if they do hit? And then take all that and distill that down into like, what can I do about it, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like information's worthless unless we can synthesize and process what should I get up and do today.
Yeah,
and,
there's a lot of information on the internet right now.
There's a lot of information everywhere, and it's hard to filter like signal to noise, as they say, right? So I'm trying to filter the signal to noise, and one of those channels is the dealer fund, where we're trying to allow dealers to participate financially in finding, identifying early stage technology solutions and growing those solutions that will also check the box of helping them in their day-to-day operations.
So you've been, I saw, around the interwebs, you doing this massive US tour. It seemed like you were in a different city every
There's a tour bus involved, a trailer, sound system.
But how many dealers at this point are involved? Okay, roll back, because initially you had an investment fund that was by some other investors that you were managing and touching some smaller tech companies and doing that work already. We could talk about that, but what was the impetus for going, okay, I've been doing that. I know that's necessary work, but now I want to move over to managing kind of dealers in a fund that's separate from this, other kind of VC-ish fund.
Yeah, great question. So, 2 years ago, decided to launch a fund, talked to a bunch of fund managers, and they said, look, you coming out of the corporate world, you need to establish a track record like in any other industry. So get started, even if it's a small fund, which was a small fund. We raised a $7 million fund, which in the grand scheme of things, a fund, it's not even considered a micro fund, a wide mobility thesis. And, we're putting $100,000 or $200,000 to work into companies as early as possible. And so to your point, where we've gotten from there is now we're 15 investments in. A third of those investors are dealer principals, and we've learned a ton.
Oh, wow.
And we've also learned, looking at other areas of venture capital, that this what I would call like vertically integrated, deep vertical integration, where you go deep into one space, can pay huge dividends. So I'm executing a playbook that I didn't write, but has been very successful elsewhere, most notably in commercial real estate. But mapping that onto dealers, where the thesis is something like this: if you go find sort of like the most progressive, forward-thinking dealers out there, and then spend time with them up front, which is what I've been doing, understanding what they think the future looks like, identifying opportunities to improve their operations, right? You distill all that down, munge it all down into areas of investment thesis, take that as a hunting license to go find solutions that address the biggest needs of your investors. And then ideally, before you ever invest, test those solutions in some of their stores before you invest. It's like you totally de-risk the venture capital model, because by the time you invest, you're like, not only do you know like the most progressive dealers in America are telling you they need a solution, right? You've just found the solution. You've tested the solution and it works. It's like, hello, right? So by the time you invest, I mean, it's a great way to de-risk the model overall. So the dealers should.
This is amazing, because you and obviously Ben Hadley are really good friends and a business partner in one of my other ventures. But like we just framed it, and he framed it for me as market product fit, right? A lot of people go at any technology or product with product market fit. Like, hey, can I get a product into a market? Am I perceiving that the market needs this? Instead of like asking which is what companies like, P&G and GE and all of, that's what they end up doing because they revert their business back into focus group first and then move to product, right? And so you're just taking that from an investment perspective going, okay, I've essentially created this high level forward-thinking focus group that consistently pushes the boundaries. We know what their itch is. We call it the itch on our side. And so we just like provide the calamine lotion, and then we know. But what's really, really cool about this is like the Seth Godin theory implemented into market product fit, is that people like us do things like this, which means that now if it works for these 4 dealers and they're progressive and they match the psychographics or the technographics of these other 60 dealers, the probability of these other 60 needing the same thing that these 4 needed is really high. So now my investment dollars actually go much further. And not just that, but now I've met the bell curve, which means the next level of dealerships probably now know that they need this too, and they have the proof case of the early adopters to say yes, right? I mean, it's unbelievably smart, genius.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. I mean, the only thing I'll add to you is like the way we've kind of discussed it internally is like we want to be the seal of approval, right? The stamp that by the time we've done all this work, every other dealer who isn't part of our fund will benefit because they'll be like, these guys do their work up front, they validate it. And to your point, then I should be leaning in to adopt.
Yep.
And it's just Monday.
It's just Monday. It's Monday.
It's only the first of the month.
Okay, so and this is what's recently I've seen you posting about just seeking out companies that might be supporting, hiring, retaining, training technicians, right? Obviously, a big pain point within dealers right now is finding, and not just finding, but keeping technicians, making them more efficient so that we can turn higher hours in bays and all those types of things. If that's one of those things that you're seeing that are needing to be solved, maybe what are like the 2 or 3 hot items that you're seeing across the industry, and not to kind of like give the farm away to someone that might be looking to build these, but you'd probably be looking to find them. But
we want people to build.
We want
the entrepreneurs to come to us.
What are you seeing out there that are kind of the big things that dealers or the dealer network are asking for right now that you all are trying to seek out solutions for? Because this is what's really cool is I think, we're going to, at a SoduCon, which you're going to be at and speaking, and we're really excited about, we're actually going to do dealers pitching vendors, which is essentially what this is. But what we really want to be as a Sodu is the ability for a common place for ideas to be synthesized, right? That maybe there's not a place to hire, maybe there's not a technology that's hiring, retaining, training, and making technicians more efficient. But if we told that story more, there might be even a few vendors that synthesize the idea because they did one part here, one part here, one part here. We create Nuco, and all of a sudden things take off. So what are those few things that you're kind of seeing in the market right now that need to be synthesized?
Yeah, great. So I mean, I could talk endlessly about this, but let me pull out the 3 that probably have percolated to the top. So the first is what you mentioned. I mean, we've heard consistently from dealers that, and this is nothing new, right? But it's just getting attenuated where they can't hire techs. I think it's going to get worse because the complexity of the cars are going to get worse, right? You're going to need a much more sophisticated technician to work on ADAS systems and electrification and connected cars with over-the-air updates, et cetera. So the technician shortage is palpable for these guys.
And risk averse. Right.
And risk averse, maybe to get the shots, right?
You could die.
To wear the rubber suits, yeah. But well, all kidding aside, but no, I the way I would characterize it is like it's a shortage of techs on the front end. It's compensating those techs correctly so they stay around and don't skip and go to other dealers. And then it's like tech productivity, because obviously if the productivity of my tech doubles, then I need half as many techs. So I think all 3 of those areas are of interest to us. They might be different solutions, right, for finding, retaining, and productivity. But I mean, all of those areas are very interesting. So if you're an entrepreneur out there with an interest or a company, we'd love to talk to you. Number 1. Number 2 would be what I would call, and we've talked about this before, but process automation. Outside of automotive, you call it RPA, robotic process automation, which is really a fancy term for saying if you've got a clerk who sits in front of a computer screen and fills out the same form multiple times a day, you should be able to automate all that, right? Have higher accuracy rate, do it quicker, and free them up to go do something of higher value. And in this industry, we can walk into a dealer and we can see people sitting, filling out forms over and over and over, sometimes in multiple tabs within their browser. And all that should go away. And there has not been as much innovation in this space as needed. And, I think when we get back to increasing margin compression, which will happen, dealers are going to look at their cost structure and say, how do I eliminate costs? And one is going to be duplicative effort, right? Removing duplicative effort by automation. So that's number two. So if anybody's working on automation, very interested in talking to them. And then the last is like what I would call like picking money up off the floor. And I would put that in like these two buckets, right? That'll resonate with you guys. One is we know that consumers are presented F&I products that they turn down. And probably not because they do or don't want the F&I product, because by that point in the process, they're so tired out that they're just like, I don't want anything. Yep. And following up with those consumers 7 days, 14, 28 days later, at the suggestible moment, and communicating in the way they want to be communicated to introduce why they might actually want to take wheel insurance, tire insurance, or whatever, extended warranties, service contracts. I think that there needs to be more innovation in that. And in the same vein, exactly the same use case applied to turn downs in service. I go in for an oil change. They tell me I need 4 rotors. It's $1,000. I'm like, I don't have $1,000 in my bank account, or I don't have the time today. I got to get back to work. I mean, we know now that consumer needs that work done and has to get that work done at some point. Mm-hmm. And, most dealers, with all due respect, might send out a mailer 6 months later, but aren't smart around like using like sort of artificial intelligence to follow up and feed back to the consumer, hey, you turn this down, we can come pick up your car and bring it in, make it really convenient for you. And by the way, we can give you a discount. We've got the parts in stock. Make it easy for the consumer to say yes subsequently. And I think that we can start to fill up those service bays at times where, there might be gaps, right? There might be extra capacity. So I think, to recap, I think that, yes, technician shortages is a big thing. I think that process automation is a big thing. And then I think that either F&I or service turn downs and following up with consumers, all of which I'd love to find companies to invest in.
Awesome.
Just a couple.
Hey, maybe we'll talk after this, because I'm already like, I think that and this one over here and this one over here. So
let's go.
Which you probably know about all of them, and you're like, Kyle, I've already researched that, but we'll figure.
No. I don't know. I don't know everything. I try to stay on top of everything, but no, there's always interesting companies that come out of the woodwork. So love to hear what you think.
Awesome.
So, man, this is one of those scenarios, and we don't get in this one very often, where we're 25 minutes in already, and it's like maybe we need like a Joe Rogan length podcast. Because I really feel like we could probably sit here for another 2.5 hours. And I mean, we haven't scratched the surface of EV. We haven't scratched the surface of all the crazy transition and business models and OEM relationships. And we're not going to have time to do that today, which means we're going to have you back for sure. But I think we have time for,
too bad.
We have time for like another one.
All right.
Right. I think, should we dive down? Go ahead, Kyle.
Look,
you get the last question.
I have one more question, and this is, I am going to turn to like the OEM EVs, that type of thing, because, what I find really interesting is you have this weekly drip email that you introduced a few months ago. If no one's getting it, you should definitely go to automotiveventures.com and get the monthly intel report, which will also subscribe you to these weeklies. And a lot of it is a little bit Greek to me, right? I understand the mobility landscape a little bit, but what's really interesting to me is, as dealers especially, we pay attention to dealer tech and what's happening in M&As in the dealer space. But what you've done is said, hey, look, that's like a small portion of this email, and look at all of these other things happening, among mobility. And I've even seen that shift over the last 6 months in your social media presence, in recognizing these almost like global mobility moves that are being made in the autonomous driving, EV space, and all that, and all of those verticals that are still in this automotive vertical. But, what's like you said, the straight line from news to insights to activity. What's particularly with those things, and I know that a lot of that is talking to like the VCs and the people that follow you on that side of space, but what's the straight line for dealers from news to insights to activity in the mobility and EV and autonomous driving spaces that you're seeing right now, and why they need to pay attention to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've characterized it well. I mean, it's not that pressing for the average dealer to paying attention to these themes, other than the fact that there is a long shot chance that some of these things could be fairly disruptive, right? If you remember 5 years ago, there was a lot of talk from consultants that we were going to have robo taxis everywhere, and Uber was going to switch to driverless vehicles, and everything was going to be on demand, and the cost per mile was going to be a lot less than ownership. Well, luckily, we didn't have like a bunch of dealers saying, the world's collapsing, et cetera, and run for the hills, because that hasn't really materialized for a bunch of reasons. But I mean, we do know is that the cars are getting more complex, and the threshold for repairs is going to be higher. You're going to need more sophisticated technicians to repair these things in the future. We do know with EVs, they don't have oil, right? Service intervals are going to be a lot longer. And we do know, for example, that the OEMs are talking a lot about billions of dollars of subscription services that the consumer is going to be able to unlock in their car, whether it's performance or in-cabin experiences. And what hasn't been determined yet is what the revenue share will be between the OEM and the dealer. When I buy a car and then 6 months later, I get a solicitation from the manufacturer to say, hey, Steve, there's a new feature. You can unlock another 100 horsepower for $50 a month. And I get on my app and click OK. Who gets the revenue? So while I think a lot of these things seem like the Jetsons and seem like really far away, I think that more immediately, these things will eventually creep into dealer land, and the dealers need to be at least aware of them, right? So nothing to freak out about yet. But I mean, shame on them if they've never, ever heard of over-the-air updates and don't know what that means, and how that could be potentially disruptive to the amount of recalls that they get back in the service base. And, so I think that we don't need to be spending 100% of our time looking at all these adjacent areas. But what we know is like what goes on in these adjacent areas will definitely have an impact back in the dealer world. And I'll do my best to stay abreast of all those things and bring those back into context for dealers.
Awesome. Well, Steve, thanks. I think I couldn't wrap that more. I have 8 more questions, but I have to wrap it because I was like thinking about phones and whether providers and carriers.
Oh,
and then
gosh.
like, I was like, is that happening? We can look outside of the industry to understand these trends. We'll get to that. But absolute pleasure having you on today. Thanks for joining us. We can't wait to see you at ASOTOCon. I'll remind everyone, like, head to automotiveventures.com if you haven't done so, and make sure and follow Steve on LinkedIn because it'll just kind of keep you abreast, and he does an incredible job at those insights. So thanks for joining us, and man, we can't wait to
well, guys, let me say, I think you guys are the hardest working guys in the industry. And I just really appreciate everything that you do on behalf of the industry, because I really think that your locus is to think about what the industry needs and get ahead of it. So I really appreciate that you guys are out there doing what you do.
I really appreciate that.
Thank you. You just made my week.
Okay, so that literally was one of my favorite interviews I've ever done in my life. I think it still has something to do with the fact that he's Canadian. I don't know how to tie that back in. but Mike.
Okay, but first of all, you're talking about origin stories and he's sharing a little bit of his. I just found out that he's Canadian. I don't know why I had never connected those dots.
Well, it's the thing when people from Canada, I have a friend from Canada. Do you know them? Like there's like 5 people in Canada. Do you get that?
Yeah, all the time. Where are you from? Alberta. Where are they from? Newfoundland. Oh, cool. That's only 12,000 miles away. But yes, as a matter of fact, I do know Chad Smith.
Well, I mean, Canada and origin stories really go hand in hand. I mean, think of all the origin stories like the superheroes that came out of Canada. Oh, never mind.
You mean like Superman?
Superman's Canadian? Oh, the in-ears are coming out. If you listen
to the audio, he's gone. We've lost.
He threw the hat off. The in-ears are flying out. He just kicked the cat.
Wolverine?
Okay.
Now, Wolverine is just Australian only because... No, I'm kidding. He's not Australian.
Steve
All right, back to
Greenfield
Steve
is
Greenfield.
Wolverine.
That would well. So Steve Greenfield, he has a monthly auto intel report that he releases, and he just released August's a day ago or today when we're recording this, and every time I read something that comes out of the thoughtfulness that happens from Steve Greenfield, it is like the most. It's like this duality of me not believing what I'm reading because it's so insightful, and also being like, why didn't I realize this before? Because it's so clear.
Yeah,
that's it. I'm stumped.
It's mind-boggling, and I think that his insight into this, like, I'm totally ripping this. His insight during this conversation into, like, okay, absorb, insights, action, right? Going, okay, that's a thing that I need to absorb. That's a communication. That's a media. That's a news story that I need to absorb. Now we have to draw out insights, because if you only go from absorption to action, then you miss that, like, the work of going, what can I glean out of this that's maybe not written, right? The lines between the lines. And he's doing so much of that for the industry. But now what he's turned and done with, like, the dealer fund, and even some of the way that he's communicating at the front end of the Intel report, is saying, okay, now I'm seeing all of this, and because of, like Michael said, all of this historical insight and future insight that I have because I'm watching the industry and the global industry, now I'm going to provide the industry with some level of action, whether that be in technology or next steps from a process or people perspective. And that walk, I think, is something that we can implement across our whole day, right?
This is why the collaboration and this project that we have here is so critical, because there are so many paths that each of us are walking, and that path is our area of focus, and we go deep on that area of focus. We need somebody like Steve to be watching the economy, to be watching how things are ebbing and flowing, and what the demand is like, and maybe how the OEMs are perceiving things. That's his lane. He's sticking to it. Why it's so critical, and why I'm so excited that you guys have put this together and invited me to be a part of it, is now we get to hear other avenues that we don't typically hear. It's automotive. We usually hear about sales and marketing and leadership and culture. But what about the economy? What about the sub-layer of what actually moves things in this industry? And that's where Steve comes in. I think it's so valuable. That was our conversation with Steve Greenfield. On behalf of Paul Daly, Kyle Mountseer, and myself, Michael Cirillo, this is Auto Collabs. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to Auto Collabs.